Well, kids, in order to round out the opening repertoire, wow, repertoire, that sounds like a French word. We call that foreshadowing. Today, we need to talk about what to do against the French, which is the last of the major openings once we play e4. We've talked about e5 in our first couple of videos. We just talked about c5, the Sicilian. Now, we're going to talk about the French, the last of the big three responses to e4. Now, how do you play the French? Well, you wake up at 6 a.m., you buy a baguette, you read Voltaire, and you have a ridiculously tiny coffee. No, that's how to be French. That's not how to beat the French. We'll get to how to be French in some other travel series video. I have actually debated for a while what to teach you, my fans, my chess kids, against the French. Now, I did get done telling you in a recent video that whenever your opponent lets you get the snowplow and put those two pawns side by side, you should do it. However, here's the problem. Every single person that plays the French is going to study d4 as white's second move. This is going to be 98.724% of what they are getting ready for. And when they play d5, there's a major split. Do we push? Do we take? Do we defend the pawn this knight? Do we defend the pawn the knight going the other way? These are all good moves, but again, they're all going to be studied a lot by kids who play the French. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to teach you my secret weapon. That's right. I'm going to teach you the exact treatment against the French that I was taught when I was your age. But Fun Master Mike, you don't even know my age. You know what I do know, though? I know that whatever age you are now, I was once that age. And if I have any 75-year-old grandpas watching, well, I hope I look as good as you when I turn 75. I'm not quite there yet. I'm going to teach you the two knights variation. Why do we call it that? Well, because on your next two moves, you're going to move your two knights. It's pretty simple. In fact, I don't even remember exactly which knight I moved first. It almost doesn't even matter. But I do believe this knight's a little bit more common to move first. So we are going to go with that. Now, black, of course, always strikes in the center. Any French player is going to play d5 on move 2. And to complete the two knights, we move out our second knight. Yeah, it's not just a clever name. Okay, this is going to be the position that you're going to get into in every single one of your French games. Now, almost nobody takes this pawn because that just invites your knight to the middle of the chessboard and white's doing fine. We're not even going to talk about that position. I'm also not a very big fan of pushing the pawn. Even though that move looks like it's doing damage to your knight, you can actually very calmly move your knight back here, double attack this pawn, and you can even just fianchetto your bishop on the next couple of moves. You're in a little bit of a King's Indian attack. I don't think anybody has ever played d4 against me in this position, so we're going to skip over that move as well. The number one move by far, and it's not close, the subject of our entire video today is going to be this move knight f6, because that puts more pressure on your center, and that's a very common move that black would play in the French anyway. Okay, what to do? We finally have to make a decision about our pawn. It is being attacked twice. Do not play d3 in this position. If you play d3, your opponent will take. And whether you take back with your pawn right away, or you take with your knight and then take with your pawn after the knight's trade, at some point, this pawn, he's going there, but he doesn't want to go there because he had a ticket to Memphis and he ended up in Cincinnati and he don't know how he got there. Okay, but the point is, when the pawn takes on e4, then the queens will trade and you're probably going to have to take back with your king at some point, and your king is going to be on an open file, and your king wants to fly business class, but suddenly he's in economy. Let's go back. All of my plain jokes aside, and apologies to any of my friends in Cincinnati, you're not the real Queen City. Charlotte is. Just want to make sure you know that. What I want you to do in this position is, I want you to push your pawn. Okay, every French player is going to bring their knight back to the square d7. It is actually not a good move, I don't think, to come to the middle of the chessboard, because if you do, this knight is actually more of a target than it is a strength. You could take the knight and probably get a good position because this pawn's a little bit of a wayward piece on that square, or the incredibly clever move, which probably doesn't come to you right away, is actually to play knight e2. Avoid the knight trade and get ready to kick the knight, and he's going to have to run, and you can actually kick him again, and you're gaining a lot of time attacking this knight all around the chessboard. So again, most French players play here. I think pretty much every time I play this opening as a kid, I ended up getting in this position. Okay, now we're going to go ahead and expand in the center with the move d4. And again, every French player knows this lever, whatever you want to call it, 2,000 levers all lead to this move, pawn c5, okay? This is always going to happen. It is the position you're going to study the most. Now, interestingly, we often leave these two pawns aiming at each other in the French when our pawn is able to move to c3. But of course, our pawn can't move to c3. So we actually want to take action here. We do not want to leave this tension in the middle of the board. Here's the reason. If you develop one of your bishops or something like that, when this pawn takes, you can't take with the knight because nobody's home to guard this pawn. And if this pawn takes and you take with the queen, this knight will just jump to this square, gaining time attacking your queen and double attacking your weak pawn on e5. So what I want to do is go ahead and capture this pawn. Now this is kind of a funny position. Black has two moves here that are going to lead to the exact same position. However, if black plays knight c6 first before taking the pawn, that's actually a little bit of a hint to you that black is a little bit of a stronger player. It's not actually like a much stronger move, but the fact that your opponent delays the recapture of the pawn is kind of a higher level thought, if that makes any sense to you. Now, don't panic if your opponent plays knight c6 before bishop takes c5. I'm obviously going to teach you what to do. Once again, if the bishop takes, your opponent's just going to play knight here on the next turn. But knight here is a little bit more critical of a move, and here's why. This pawn's a goner, okay? Remember, you captured a pawn on c5, you're going to lose that pawn back. But you really don't want to lose this pawn in the meantime, because then essentially, you're going to be down two pawns. So this pawn now being double attacked, I want you to save that pawn. Don't play bishop e3 and try to save that pawn, okay? I want you to save the center pawn. So the strongest move is bishop to f4. And by the way, you guessed it, if your opponent did take back right away, I actually still want you to go ahead and play bishop f4 at some point. You actually can play bishop d3 first if you want to, and then put the bishop here later in the game. Okay, so your bishops, you know where they're going to go. I'm just explaining that if the knight comes to c6, go ahead and put the bishop here right away. Guard this pawn. Remember, that guy, he's going to get captured. Now, black pretty much always takes with the bishop, okay? That's just the common way to take because black wants to castle the king at some point. And in this position, I want you to move your bishop to complete your back row development. Bishop b5 doesn't do a lot because the knight's not even pinned, so we want to play bishop to d3. And as is often the case in the French, when your pawn gets to e5 and kicks the knight out of f6, if there's no knight on f6, there's nobody home to guard the black king in case he castles, and that is going to be the subject of the next couple minutes of this video. But I want to take a little pause in this position. I love this position for white. It's not that it's winning. The computer is not going to say, oh, white is plus minus. That's a fancy chess master way of saying that white is totally winning. But there's so many traps that black can fall into in this position, which makes it a lot easier for you to play as white. Here's one of those traps. Thank you for not asking. I'm going to tell you anyway. If black goes ahead and castles, which seems like the natural way to finish development, we are going to have some fun. We're going to switch from being a French person to being a Greek person. Hopefully, you've watched my video on the ChessKid website about the Greek gift sacrifice. That's a gift that's not really a gift. It's not the gift that keeps on giving. It's the gift that poisons the recipient. Okay, that's a bunch of word salad. What I'm saying is the Greek gift always happens on h7. It's almost always a sacrifice with your bishop, and it's when this knight is not on the happy square. Remember, if this knight was on f6, it would be guarding h7, and you pretty much can never do the Greek gift sacrifice. Let's look at it because it definitely works here. Bishop takes h7 check. Now, if you don't take the bishop, if you just move your king, white is still going to win really quickly. First of all, white's already up a pawn. White could just retreat the bishop. It's also possible to move the knight to g5 and get your queen to h5 really quickly. That should win rather quickly. Okay, so let's go back. The critical line is if the king takes the bishop, and the most common follow-up to the Greek gift is to play knight to g5 check. And this poor king, he's got 4 moves. They all lose. And instead of making you do the homework yourself, which I probably should, I'm feeling kind of nice today, I'm going to show you how to win against all 4 of the moves. Okay, let's start with the easy ones. And by the way, if you're ever examining or calculating a sacrifice, you should build like a little tree in your head and say, okay, if I sack the bishop and the king takes and I play knight g5, there's 4 different moves. You have to make sure you have a winning line against all 4 of those moves. But again, going to be a little bit nicer to you today. This is more about opening preparation than tactics or calculation. So let's start with the easy one. King h7, easy peasy, mate in 2. Do you see it? Do you see it? I hope you do. Queen h5 check. The king moves. Queen h7. Standard queen and helper mate. Let's hit the rewind button. Where else could the king go? Well, he could go to h6. But notice that lines up with our bishop, and there may be some sort of checkmate, but we don't really need a checkmate. We just need to win the queen. Notice if we move this knight anywhere, it's discovered check. So you can take on e6, or you can take on f7, which has the added benefit of being a double check. Who doesn't like a double check? And no matter where the king moves, thank you very much for the queen. White wins the queen, white wins the game. Let's go back. There's a couple other moves. Going again in our continued order of difficulty, let's do king to g8 next. Now we play queen to h5. Queen h7, of course, is a checkmate threat. And the computer actually says the best move is to give up the queen for the knight. But what I really want to show you is what happens if black tries to avoid the mate by running away with the rook. There's a classic pattern in this position. If you get too hasty, that means like too eager. You got all this Halloween candy and you're trying to eat all of it in one go. That's hasty, that's eager, okay? Queen h7, the king moves, but then when you check and the king moves and you take, there's this annoying pawn guarding the king. And yeah, queen takes pawn actually is mate, but no, it is actually not your turn. And black can play a move like rook f8 and hope to survive. White's probably still better, by the way, but black is hoping to survive. Here's what I want to do. I want to go back to this position, and I want to find an in-between move. It's actually in between two moves, or wait, that's in between two ferns. That's something totally different. It's a double in-between move. What we're going to do is we're not going to play queen h7 check. We're going to play queen takes f7 first. That removes that annoying pawn. Remember that pawn? That was the only thing stopping checkmate. Now when the king moves, we return to the seat of the crime. And then when the king moves, the queen gives check. The king moves, the queen gives check. The king moves. And it was a very fancy checkmate in 5 sequence. It's the exact same position I just showed you, except that pawn is missing. So that is checkmate at the same time. Some people would say, that's the goal of chess. Hey, that's because it is the goal of chess. I'm hitting the rewind button on Mega. And now we come to the final move. We've built our little tree. King there, king there, king there. They're all covered. But what if the king moves here? Well, this is a little bit trickier. And in this position, you actually have 2 good moves. You could play queen to g4 with the idea of any knight move being discovered check. Or you could play the move that I slightly prefer, which is to play queen to d3 first. First of all, it's a check, right? Secondly, when you play queen to g4, technically your opponent can try to capture this pawn with one of his knights and go after your queen. So I just like the checking move first because it's a little bit more direct. Now, black has to block with a pawn. If black tries to move the king, that's just checkmate on h7. Yeah, the king's not here like he usually is. He's actually on the other side, but hey, it's actually still checkmate. So in this position, your opponent has to find the move f5. Now you play queen g3. Now you might think, but Fun Master Mike, if I go back, if I'd play queen to g4 and the pawn had come to f5, then I could have played queen to g3. And that's totally true. But again, you're giving your opponent the other choice of taking this pawn, and I just don't want to have to study more than I have to. Why not play the move that only gives your opponent one response? That way you don't have to worry about the other one, right? Okay, so queen at g3, and in this position, there's just no good moves for black. Any knight move, well, maybe not anyone, but well, I guess we could say anyone. Any knight move is discovered check, but knight takes pawn is the money check because it will win the queen, right? It's discovered check with the queen, and our knight picks off the queen. Now, black can try to, let's say, run away with the queen and just put the queen on this square, for example. But in this position, you can still take this pawn with discovered check. Now, the king better go this way. If the king goes this way, that's checkmate on g7. So the king would have to go this way. And now, again, there's a couple of good moves in this position, but you can actually ignore the fact that your knight's in danger, and you can just castle. And by the way, white has already captured 2 pawns for the bishop that was sacrificed, so white already has almost equal material. This pawn is about to be captured. It's going to be the 3rd pawn to be taken, and the point is the knight simply cannot be captured, because if it is, then we give a check, and this poor king has to go back, and now white can either play this check, and the king has nowhere to go. Black's got to put something on f6, which can just be captured, or you're probably throwing tomatoes at your queen. Fun Master Mike, you forgot about the fork. Well, I actually didn't. You could throw the check in, and then when black puts something in the way, that's say the knight, then you could take, and look how pretty that position is. You're threatening this knight 3 times, and you don't even want the knight. You're just going to win the queen on the next turn. Okay, so hopefully that explains if we go way back to the position. after bishop to d3. If your opponent castles, which is a very likely move, it has happened to me in a tournament game, the Greek gift sacrifice, bishop takes h7, it works in all variations. And by the way, if you love that sacrifice and want to see it in its many forms, go to the ChessKid website because my Greek gift video talks about many other examples. Okay, here's the other major move that black likes to play in this position. Queen to b6. Why is this move so tempting? Well, it looks like a tactic that white has fallen into. I love it when we set a trap for our opponent, and the trap is that we want our opponent to play a trap, which is actually not a trap. That's, again, a lot of word salad. I'm making you eat your salad today. Here's what I really mean. When the queen goes to b6, it looks like black has one material. The queen and the bishop are making a battery leading to f2. You know what they call a battery in London? A battery. That's right. I think they do. All right, now the queen is also threatening this pawn on b2. We actually cannot really save both pawns. So what we're going to do is we're going to guard the more important pawn, which of course is f2. That's the one close to our king. That's the weak spot. We're going to go ahead and castle our king in this position. And if our opponent follows through with the plan, which is what black usually does when the queen goes to b6, if the queen takes, we get to have a lot of fun. Okay, first things first. Our knight is in danger. Our knight must be saved. And knight a4 is actually not so great. I mean, it's a good move, but we're not winning the bishop. The bishop's already being defended by the knight, and the queen can run away. I want you to play knight b5 instead. There are two ideas behind this move. Number one, knight c7 check, forking the king and the rook. And number two, the queen is running a little bit low on squares, okay? Now, rook b1 almost traps the queen, although she can take. However, if this rook could jump over the queen and land on b1, now the black queen is officially trapped. That's called foreshadowing again. Keep that in the back of your mind. Okay, now, knight c7 is the immediate threat. If we can get black to castle, then guess what? We tricked our opponent into another version of the Greek gift sacrifice. That's right. Okay, now bishop takes h7, and I definitely had this as an exact game when I was about 8 years old. Bishop takes, king takes, knight to g5 check. Okay, it's a little bit different than before, but not so different. Again, the worst move is king back to h8 because our queen goes to h5 check, and we checkmate on h7. That is by far the easiest one, okay? King h6 is just terrible. Walking the king into the same line as the bishop, you can at least play knight takes pawn, discovered check, and take the rook, and that's just great for white. So we're not going to focus on that move too much. If the king goes back to g8, though, a small warning. If you click the autopilot button and you think, oh, the game just wins itself, I just play all the same patterns Fun Master Mike has taught me, never turn your brain off, okay? Never just play a pattern you've seen before without thinking about the exact chessboard. Because in this position, if you're thinking queen h5 is the way to go with a checkmate threat, well, in the previous version of this Greek gift, the black queen was sitting at home doing nothing. But now the black queen, she's out, she's about, she's a girl on the town, and the queen can just take on c2 and magically guard the checkmate, and the queen can come all the way back and defend her king on the next move. Not only is there no checkmate, but white is down several pawns, and actually probably worse if black plays perfect defense. So, do you see another path the queen can take to get to h7 that does not allow the black queen in the defense? I bet you've already found it. If your queen goes to d3, that guards c2 pawn, it threatens the checkmate on a7, and oh, by the way, it connects the rooks. That's right. So not only do we threaten checkmate, but we also threaten the idea of swinging this rook over and trapping the black queen. And there's not really a lot that black can do. Let's say if black plays a move like f5 to block the checkmate. In this position, you could go ahead and win the queen. There is zero wrong with that. Or you could threaten checkmate first with queen h3. And even if black finds some miraculous way to defend by giving the king some room, maybe rook f7 so the king has an escape square, you can always come back to this idea of rook b1. And the attack on the black king is not over either. So pick your way to win the game. Do you want to win the queen? Do you want to win the king? Because you're probably going to win both if you get my drift. Now, if we go back, if black plays g6 to block the checkmate on h7, you can play the same stuff, except now queen h3 is probably even stronger, because now black can't even escape. If the black rook tries to move, for example, to give the king an escape hatch, well, now queen h7, king over, and queen takes pawn is going to be made. So you're going to win the game one of those two different ways, either a direct mate or you're going to trap the queen. Either one's going to be good. Let's go back, though. What if the king moves to g6? Well, now I still want you to play queen d3 check, very similar to what we looked at before. And after f5, in this position, I would actually go ahead and take that pawn en passant. A very French thing to do versus the French. I don't think queen g3 is quite as strong as before. And the reason is this queen is so far away from the evil clutches of this knight. There's no way we're going to move the knight to discover check the king and win the queen. And oh, by the way, our knight is also hanging up here on b5. So after queen takes knight, white is going to be down a lot of material. So that's why I don't quite like queen to g3 as much in this position. So once again, when black plays f5, don't forget about our rule. When a pawn moves 2 squares and is right beside yours, you can diagonally move behind it or in front of it, depending on which way your iPhone or your computer monitor is right now. And the black pawn magically leaves the chessboard. That was not a sleight of hand, okay? Funmaster Mike is not a magician. That is a rule of chess. Please don't write to us. Please learn the rule. If you don't know the rule, that's cool. We have videos on en passant here in YouTube land. Now, when the king takes, by the way, he better not go this way, right? Because queen h7 is just our old friend, Mr. Checkmate. And when the king takes, in this position, we can go back to our friend. Rook on f to b1 traps the queen. We can even play knight h7 check and try to win the rook later on. Everything's coming up white in this position, and white will clearly win the game. Okay, so far it's been a lot of fun. Black has played reasonable looking moves and yet fallen right into our trappy hands. Let's go back to this position. We've looked at why castles is bad. We've looked at why queen to b6 with the idea of winning this pawn is bad. You might wonder, well, what would a grandmaster do as black? Interestingly, one of the top moves for black is pawn to a6. I have a very small likelihood that any kid is going to find this move, and I'm even having a hard time explaining this move, okay? Probably the top move is pawn to f6. Now, this goes against a couple of opening rules. Number 1, you're pushing your f-pawn without my written permission. Number 2, you're opening up the diagonal to your king, and you're also weakening some light squares. This pawn was guarding a couple of light squares, and it's not anymore, and that's with black's light squared bishop being buried. This is a very hard move to find. And again, you're not worse or anything if your opponent plays it, but we want to put our opponent in positions where the best move is a really hard one to find. If your opponent does find f6, don't panic. It's still a reasonable position. Many grandmasters have had this position for white and for black. You're just going to capture this pawn. Probably the knight will capture to reopen this bishop. And now you're just going to castle your king, and you're going to play against these 2 pawns. It is true that black has 2 center pawns and you have 0, but I would argue that since the pawns probably can't or shouldn't move, they're going to be just as much targets as they are benefits. We can immediately put stuff on the e-file to go after the e6 pawn. The e6 pawn is essentially a backward pawn. Let's go ahead and say that black castles. I probably would not move this rook, because at some point queen b6 will be a problem, and if you lose protection of your f2 pawn, well, you're going to wish you didn't do that. Also notice that black's rook has a half-open file. We want to pay extra close attention to our f2 pawn. So the line that I would tell you in this position to play is the very simple queen e2, putting pressure on this pawn, and on the next couple of moves, I would move my rook over on the a file to e1, and maybe even plop this knight on e5 just to stop the e6 pawn from moving. By the way, we don't actually care if this pawn comes forward, because if it does, it just invites our knight right to the middle of the square. In one of our more advanced ChessKid videos, I actually talk about exactly how to play both with and against this exact pawn structure. Notice these 2 center pawns have no pawns on the files beside them. There's no black pawn on the f file. There's no black pawn on the c file. And I was trying to draw arrows there. I think that's a little bit better job. So these 2 pawns are all by themselves, and the very strange term is called hanging pawns. That's right. They keep hanging around. hanging around. But if you're white, you may not want them to hang around much longer. The general rule with hanging pawns is that if they're not side by side, they can get stuck. And when they're stuck, they're a fixed target and they're a little bit easier to win. This knight might even go to g5 and try to win this pawn. But what you don't want to do as white is allow the pawns to get side by side. When they get mobile, they get scary, okay? We have a very advanced video on ChessKid. Like I said, the whole subject is called hanging pawns. So if you want to know a lot more about this subject, and this is really master level thinking, you can go find that video on the ChessKid website or, of course, on our app. Whew, that was a really, really deep dive into how to play against the French defense. It was complicated. Was it as complicated as reading Voltaire? Probably not. Do you know who Voltaire is? No, you do not. That's okay. Next up, the Age of Enlightenment. Just kidding. Next up, we'll talk about the final couple of minor defenses that Black might play against e4. And then you will have a complete opening repertoire to play as white, and you'll be very happy when you get the first move.